Hyvää iltapäivää ja tervetuloa WSP:n webinaarin sähköisen liikenteen edistämisestä. Jatkamme tästä eteenpäin englanniksi. And now in English. Welcome to our webinar. Today we discuss about the transition into electric vehicles. The transition process has started everywhere in the so-called Western world, but the progress varies from country to country. Today we will hear the local practices from Finland, Norway and UK from our presenters. Now I want to introduce our presenters. From the city of Espoo comes Veli-Pekka Korhonen. He promotes the electrification of transport from different perspectives, like reaching the city's own emission reduction targets, increasing the cooperation with the private sector, and informing the Espoo residents. Julia Oprovac is a leading expert on zero-emission mobility and electric vehicles with WSP Norway. She has worked with several Norwegian municipalities for over 20 years. As an example, Julia has been developing the implementation of electric transport, especially in Oslo. She has also been planning the infrastructure of charging points and evaluating the development of technology. Chris Jackson from WSP UK has worked with countless fleet operators over the past 15 years, including industry roles at the vehicle leasing divisions of two high street banks and the UK's largest energy company. His role is about providing independent, evidence-based and engineering-led advice to fleets looking to decarbonize. I myself have experience in planning and evaluating transport projects around the world. Regarding electric vehicles, I have been involved in many public transport electrification projects. Those include the charging of buses, power demand of depots, changes with the operational issues, etc. Recently, I have started an EV charger feasibility study within Barents region, and nowadays we exclude the Russia. And now we start. Please join us, Veli-Pekka.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Veli-Pekka Korhonen and I work as a specialist at the city of Espoo. I come from a Sustainable Development Center in the city of Espoo. Today we are going to talk about EV charging and what we do at the city of Espoo towards sustainable mobility. Here is the Espoo story. It's our strategy. It guides our path to climate neutral Espoo by 2030. We have 5 different goals in the middle section in our Sustainable Espoo program. We'll go them through on the next slide. We have 5 different development entities to reach our goals. The development entities are mobility and transport, energy systems, circular economy and sustainable living, sustainable land use and constructions, and nearby nature and biodiversity. So our goal is to be climate neutral by 2030. The main point is that. On the left-hand side, you can see our focus areas. The current program is valid between 2021 to 2025. So the 5 goals are, we want to be forerunner in implementing the Agenda 2030. We want to be climate neutral by 2030. Espoo community and the residents act sustainably. We want to be a model city of sustainable urban development and the best partner for sustainable and smart urban solutions. On this slide, you can see 9 different methods to achieve carbon neutrality. I want to bring into focus 3 of them. First one, 6th one, and the 7th ones. Espoo will actively combat, prepare for, and adapt to climate change. We reduce the emissions from energy, transport, and constructions, and we increase the share of walking, cycling, and public transport, and the use of zero-emission fuels will be promoted. So then few slides with numbers to make the goal more concrete. In Espoo, greenhouse gas emissions per capita from transport have decreased by 32% between 1990 and 2021. On this slide, you can see the distribution of greenhouse gas emissions in Espoo. And as you can see, the biggest block goes to transportation, next one, district heating. But the main point is that the biggest one is transportation. After previous slides here, you can see that almost half of the transportation methods has been done by car, private car. That is very much. That is one of the reasons why we want to develop EV charging together with different stakeholders. So we have development of charging infrastructure for electric cars. We have been prepared the development guidelines for the charging infrastructure. These development guidelines apply to the city's own electric vehicles. The development guidelines for the charging infrastructures are instructions on how the city of Espoo procures infrastructure, charging hardware and software, and will implement a charging network in the future. It will measure for the development of the city's charging infrastructure, a description of responsibilities and contact persons, and the clean vehicles directive monitoring. Also, we want to be a pioneers and an example for the townspeople. We have found out what kind of uses we have on different places. We divided that charging point types into 3 different parts. Places where only cities' own cars are being charged. Second one is places where cities' own cars are being charged, an option to charge for townspeople too, like, for example, schoolyards. And third one, public street space. When we come to closer and closer to public street space, investing interest by commercial operators is growing. Otherwise, city has to invest in itself, like in the first charging point type, where only city's own cars are being charged. So, to sum up, we implement the Espoo story with cross-administrative programs towards cleaner, greener, and smarter urban mobility. And how to get there? New transportation services, enabling a shift to sustainable modes of transportation for walking, cycling, and public transport, automatic transport, renewing the car fleet, development of charging infrastructure for electric cars and promotion of biofuels, and market sustainable practices also to citizens. So let's work together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Veli-Pekka. We invite Julia on our virtual stage. Welcome, Julia.
Thank you, Risto, and good afternoon, everyone. I will give a short presentation on what is needed for an emission-free urban transport based on the experiences from Oslo in Norway. Next, please. The European Commission has set a goal that Europe will become the first climate neutral continent in the world. And in 2020, EU adopted the European Green Deal, which is a set of policies aiming at no net emissions of greenhouse gases by 2050, an economic growth decoupled from resource use, and that no person and no place should be left behind in this transition to a climate neutral Europe. EU has selected 100 cities to pave the way towards climate neutrality in 2030, and Oslo is one of these front runners. Next, please. To reach these high ambitions requires a rethinking of urban transportation. Emissions from transport is already a severe challenge, and towards 2050, passenger transport is expected to increase with 40%, and freight transport is expected to increase with 60%. So really, radical measures are needed to reduce climate gas emissions from the transport sector. And electrification will play a pivotal role to reach emission-free urban transport. Oslo has already set bold targets for transport. They have a target to reduce motorized traffic by 1/3 by 2030. They have set target that all growth in traffic shall be taken by walking, cycling, or public transport. And they have a target that only emission-free passenger cars and vans by 2030. Next, please. Some keys to successful transition to electrification. You need cars provided by the automotive industry. You need incentives on national and local level, and you need chargers provided by the city and by private sector. Norway has had great initiatives, incentives on national level already back in 1990s for buying and using EVs. And the city of Oslo has added up with local incentives for charging and parking. For example, it has been free to park an EV, an electrical vehicle. It has been free to pass the road toll if you have an electrical vehicle. It has been free to charge your electrical vehicle on a public charging point. The city of Oslo has also provided economic incentives. For example, they have a subsidy, they give subsidies to housing associations if they want to put up a charger on their private parking lots. They have also put a local legislation making it difficult for a board of a housing association to say no if a resident wants to put up a charger at the private parking area or at the garage. I also want to say that some of these economical incentives related to electrical vehicles, free of charging, free of parking, and the free road toll, those have, as the EVs have increased in Oslo, those free charging has been taken away, and now there is a small fee if you pass the road toll or if you want to charge your electrical vehicle on a public charging station, and also if you want to park the car, but it's still less compared to for a fossil fuel car. And then another than the keys to success is you need chargers then. And the city of Oslo has taken an active role in deploying charging infrastructure, and by this supported the development of the EV market in Oslo. They already started this in 2008. They started then to deploy slow chargers. And by end of 2019, the city of Oslo has deployed more than 1,600 public charging points. They also have entered a cooperation with the private sector to establish rapid chargers. And by end of 2019, they had established 35 rapid chargers in the city. And by end of 2019, if we look at the slow charging network, there was approximately 28 electrical vehicles on one charging point for the slow charger, just to give you an idea of the density of electrical vehicles per one charging point. Yes, next, please. The Oslo city has two types of contract with operators. For the normal charging network, which is up to 22 kilowatt, The city owns and operates its own charging network. The operator runs the charging system, and the operator is selected through a procurement process. The fast charging network, or the hubs with rapid fast chargers, which is 50 kilowatt or above. Here, the city has entered a partnership with the private sector. So there is a shared responsibility of the investment costs and the split of income and the profit. The operator owns and operates the charging system. Back in the days, or early in 2008 and a bit forward, it was common that the city covered the costs for the infrastructure below the ground, and that the operator covered the costs above the ground. This shared responsibility of costs have lately been slightly changed then. And the split of profit is commonly used as a procurement criteria when selecting then the operator through a procurement system. I can just say then up to the right here, you see then an example of a hub with rapid chargers. It's 50 kilowatts. You can stay here for maximum 30 minutes. This picture was taken yesterday before 4 o'clock. So you can see all of the charging points were occupied. To the left is an example of a slow charging public network, or a public charging points of a slow charger. In the center of Oslo. It was also taken yesterday at the same time, before 4 o'clock, before people have come back from their work. There is 10 public charging points here and 4 cars. So here there is more than 50% of the charging points are free then. But after 5, 6 o'clock, all of these will probably be fully booked. Yes, please, next. Yes, so the passenger car sector, as I've said, the city of Oslo has taken an active role in deploying public charging structure, and that has contributed to the success of Oslo. The EV uptake in Oslo is a success story globally, I would say. And in the period from January to June this year, 80%, more than 80% of the passengers' cars sold are fully electric. The Oslo traffic picture will change from approximately 90,000 electric passenger cars today to almost 200,000 electrical vehicles in 2030. And this means that even if the city of Oslo has been very, very active in deploying public charging points, they still need to take an active role in order not to stop the transition to EVs. And this will, so next slide, please, Risto. And therefore, in 2020, the city of Oslo, they did a mapping of the needs for their charging. The city has limited resources, and they wanted to understand where is the demand for public charging points, where should we focus our efforts continuing forward. So what we did was we looked at the EV share in the city, it's the picture to the left, and we looked at the housing structure, and we looked at the utilization rate of the existing public charging stations to get an idea of what to prioritize further on. So if we look at the map to the right, what we saw was that in the inner part of the city, in the dark blue areas, is dominated. Here we saw that the utilization rate of the public charging station, the utilization rate was quite high here. And in this area, you also have a large share of the buildings are apartment blocks built before 1960, meaning that they don't have access to private parking areas. The people living in these apartment blocks, they are parking their car out on the street, and they are then relying on that there is public charging points out on the streets in order to be able to charge their cars over the night. So here is an area that we saw. There is a need for further deployment of the public charging points. In the light blue areas, in the outer part of the city, we saw that the EV uptake, the EV share was quite high, and these areas are dominated by, here you have a large amount of single houses, and here the owners of a single house, they can put up their own charger in their garage. So here the municipality, it's not a big need for public charging points because the private inhabitants, they can put up their own chargers. In the middle blue areas is dominated by apartment blocks built after 1960s. And they have access to private parking areas. They have garages or private parking areas outside. So here, our recommendation was that here the municipality or the city of Oslo should focus on, for example, providing subsidy schemes to these housing associations so that they can put up chargers on their parking areas. Because what we have seen is that these housing associations, they were maybe a little bit, in some cases, reluctant to put up chargers because due to the associated costs. So here the city has then initiated a subsidy scheme. Yes, next, thank you. Yes, just to summarize then, our recommendations was then when it comes to the role of the, what should the Oslo city, what role should they have further on now? And it is then, since they have limited resources, it is to first leave it to the private initiatives to deploy charging, support the private sector to deploy charging when needed. It could, for example, be initiate subsidy schemes, provide land area because it's difficult to find area to deploy these charging locations for the chargers. And as a last resort, deploy public charging points only where needed and where the commercial sector is not interested in going in. Yes, please, next. That was the personal passenger car sector, which again, it's a success story in Oslo. But the city still has a role to play here, not to stop up the transition to EVs. But the cities also then have high ambitions for the vans and heavy vehicle sector. If we look at in May 2022, 35% of the vans sold were fully electric in Oslo. 33% of the heavy vehicles were fully electric in May 2022. And when it comes to vans, the city is deploying charging points, public charging points, but they're reserving it for vans only in the inner city. And when it comes to the heavy vehicles, here the city needs to deploy ultra-rapid charging so that the driver can charge their vehicle during their break. And for this segment, it is also important. They need large space to establish a charging station, and that this is a challenge in the city to find an appropriate area. Next, please. Electrification is an important step to fulfill Oslo's goals for emission-free transport, but it will not solve all challenges for urban transport. Oslo also has a goal of reducing traffic by 1/3. Next, please. To sum up, electrification is a key to emission-free urban transport, and charging is a key to electrification. And public charging secures that no one is left behind. And here, the city and municipality has an important role to play. But again, electrification will not solve all challenges. An holistic approach is needed to secure smarter and cleaner mobility. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. If you have questions or comments to Julia, please add those to Q&A chat. Now we invite Chris on the stage. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, everyone. Hopefully you can see my slides coming through now. Good afternoon. My name is Chris Jackson. I'm from the UK, and I'm here representing the Future Mobility team to discuss some of the lessons learned for electric charging here in the UK. If I can kind of just start by saying, I'm sure many of us here will be kind of familiar with this kind of scene. This is really what we are trying to avoid. So a motorist trying to do the right thing by charging their electric vehicle, but not going about it in the right way. Very dangerous hazards at work there. So collaboratively, we work with our clients to hopefully put the right infrastructure in the right place. To help set the scene, I'll take you through some of the interventions that the UK government are doing at the moment. These are some of the main ones. So the first one is a rapid charging fund. Now this is it's a large amount of money. It's £950 million, and this is for our major road and motorway network. It's to prepare those key locations to make sure that there is sufficient electrical capacity at those locations, and that will be deployed over the next decade or so. We have the electric vehicle infrastructure strategy. So the government put this out earlier this year, and there are kind of two things that are kind of important here. So this document sets the vision and the action plan for what we do. And the government set a date of 2030 for the end of the sale of new vehicles solely powered by petrol or diesel. That's 2030. And in 2035, all cars and vans will be fully zero emission at the tailpipe. That's by 2035. So the Department for Transport here in the UK are also looking at how people use charge points, how easy it is to pay, how we can group networks together and allow roaming, reliability of the charge points, and also a single payment metric, so pence per kilowatt hour. Our British Standards Institution is also looking at how accessible these charge points are. Julia mentioned this. This infrastructure should be accessible for all. The kind of things that the Standards Institute is looking at is the weight of the cables, the height of the charge points, the height of the curbs, just to make sure it's accessible for all. We have open data. Oh, beg your pardon. Sorry, I've just gone through the. So we have open data requirements. So here in the UK, the networks don't really talk to each other. So we're investing in opening up data for public and government use. We have a local electric vehicle infrastructure scheme. So the image I started with, this scheme is particularly to put that infrastructure in place. So what we call kind of on-street charging. So where private residences haven't got access to a charge point. So that scheme has just opened. So £10 million and £400 million next year. We have individual grants for charge points, £350 per socket. That's available at workplaces and home. We have specific regulations mandating that the security of the charge points, new charge points are able to share data openly. And we have a zero emission vehicle mandate that's coming in 2024, where the manufacturers will have to sell a certain percentage of electric vehicles here in the UK. And we also have a transport bill, which is really making sure that the cities and local authorities actually do have a strategy in place. So we've seen there's an awful lot going on, but there's still work to do. Local authorities, cities should be the enablers to put that private sector investment and for the public sector to fill any gaps where required. However, there are still many challenges to overcome. I'll speak to some of those very briefly. So some of the main challenges that we're seeing for our local authorities are accessing that funding and having the resources to do something with it is a challenge. The knowledge around the charge points and just general electrification of transport. There are knowledge gaps, and we can help, to help make these officers make better decisions. And that comes from helping them with understanding where the demand is going to come from and really just mapping out what's going on in their local area. The grid connection costs of the electrical network costs can be high, and the upgrades can be very time consuming as well. And there are a number of different charge point operators here in the UK, and having the resource within the city to negotiate the best deal can be a challenge. And for that reason, because there is a lot of choice, choosing the right technology just requires a certain level of knowledge as well. But we know things are changing. The government is ensuring that local authorities have that right information, and obviously organisations like WSP can help there as well. We'll quickly talk you through some of the delivery models that we have over here. They may be similar where you are. Obviously, just for the purposes of time, a lot of the other advantages and disadvantages have been removed. But if you look at the own and operate model, so on the scale of potential income and potential risk, it's quite high, and that's because the individual charge points are kind of paid for by the public sector. There may be an arrangement with a charge point operator to provide a back office for a fixed fee. The external operator is where the public sector funds that initial investment, and then a charge point operator comes in to provide a back office service for a share of revenue. And somewhere in the middle we have a concession model. So this involves the transfer of risk to a charge point operator. They take over the operations and maintenance, but the local authority retains ownership of the electrical connection. And at the opposite end of the scale, so lowest potential income, kind of lowest potential risk, we have the fully funded model. So all of the capital and ongoing costs are outsourced to a charge point operator in return for a long-term lease or license of that particular piece of land, so that charge point operator can recover their costs. So what can we do as WSP? Just a very quick example. How can we put some of these lessons learned into practice? So on the left-hand side, we have this is how our EV Ready tool kind of sets out how we can make some better decisions. Veli-Pekka has already mentioned this, the opportunity to shift mode. How can we get people out of cars and into more sustainable modes of travel? Can we do that? That's one of the first things that we look at. But then we will also look at, what are the electric vehicle trends now and in the future? How do we baseline what's going on in the local area? And then how do we provide different scenarios based on how people might how might they select an electric vehicle? And on the right hand side, some of the methodology, which is what does this all mean in a local level? Where is the demand for charging going to be the highest? How attractive are certain locations or unattractive they might be for different reasons? And then what type of chargers might you need? So what this kind of means in the flow of how it works. So we'll look at the uptake of electric vehicles themselves. So there's lots of different forecasts that we look at here. Some of them provided by the government, some of them are our own. And we look at the kind of people who might want to buy an electric vehicle and their reasons for it and how often they might use it. We'll then look at the charge point forecasting as well. Again, lots of things that we look at here. So the charging habits, the vehicle mileage, its range and its efficiency, where people have that ability to charge privately off street. Things like charging rates and different trends will be mapped in the charge point requirements. And then we have what we call supply and demand, and that is just really factoring in where people are most likely to want to charge their electric vehicle and where not, and where the local authority or the city might have to step in with their own investment. I thought it'd be a good idea quickly to show you what some of these outputs look like. So it's a very visual system. The maps, as you can kind of see on the screen, provide a different output depending on what question is being asked. So if we kind of look at number 1, that is a prioritization of different sites in a particular location. And number 2 is a real deep level of where the forecasted demand for charge points is going to be. Number 3 is an example of where we can offer an opportunity to shift modes away from cars into things like cycling, walking, wheeling, and public transport. And number 4 is a visualization of the electrical network, and where any constraints, where any power problems might be, helps with an investment decision. Number 5 is where particular locations are very dependent on having to charge on street. It's a good idea to visualize which are the where the priority areas are. And number 6 is a citywide scoring matrix of critical sites, and then how to grade them in terms of attractiveness to the private and public sector. So in summary then, I'll quickly take you through kind of some of the common lessons learned. The first one, it's an obvious one, but you need a strategy. You need to set that strategy, get a cost benefit analysis done, understand why you need the scheme, what the benefits are going to bring, and then start small and then use data to inform a larger scale rollout. There is funding available, again, particularly in the UK. So identify where that funding will come from. So the business case for fast charging is promising, but it's not certain. It does depend on many factors, high utilization, low cost of energy, and understand how you're going to plan that particular project. Always consider the user experience, so how people will interact with this new technology, and what potential ways you have to interact with a new customer base, for instance. The location is very, very important, where the locations of the charge points are going to be, and consider where they're going to be. Publicly accessible, is it a workplace, is it at home, who might be using it, and if at all possible, do you have the opportunity for on-site renewable power generation and energy storage? The software and the data that comes from that software is valuable. A decision will be made as to whether you as an organisation want to retain control of that or not. But just be aware that we kind of recommend that the hardware and software are able to move with the times, and we recommend an open platform rather than a closed system that isn't able to integrate with other networks and on other pieces of hardware. What's very important here is, in the UK, is early engagement with the owner of the local electricity network. What can happen is that budgets and programs can be delayed if this is left too late in the process. And making sure that your equipment is compliant with the latest standards and regulations. And what is important is, do not forget the ongoing maintenance of these units once they're installed. Who's responsible for customer service support and the ongoing maintenance of these units? And kind of finally, just agree on ownership structure. Who takes ownership when, and which part of the network is going to be managed by which party? I think that's me done, I will now thank you very much, and I will hand over to Risto. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Now we heard interesting examples from Finland, Norway and UK, and we could chat a bit. I have some questions from our presenters. The first question is for Veli-Pekka, City of Espoo. How the charging service providers for municipal properties are chosen? Are the locations given for free, or does the city get rent?
Voisin vastata tähän suomeksi.
Yes, you can answer in Finnish. Sorry, our English colleagues.
Joo, eli tullaan kilpailuttamaan varmasti kaikki latauspalvelujen tarjoajat tähän. Ei ole vielä selvää, että mihin hankintajärjestelmään liitytään, mutta Hanselin dynaamisesta hankintajärjestelmästä ollaan käyty keskustelua, mutta sitä ei ole vielä valittu eikä se ole varmaa. Ja tuohon kaupungin vuokra-asiaan sekä siitä en osaa vastata, että miten, mutta jos puhutaan siitä, että hankitaan latausjärjestelmiä kaupungin omiin tarpeisiin, niin silloin ei varmastikaan tarvitse tätä vuokraa maksaa, mutta jos siinä ollaan tässä välimallissa, mitä esittelin, eli sinne voi tulla lataamaan myös muut kuin kaupungin omat sähköautot, niin siinä mahdollisesti, mutta näin pitkälle ei olla mietitty. Tosi hyvä kysymys siihen liittyen. Tällä päästään eteenpäin. Kiitos.
All right, thank you, Veli-Pekka. Kiitos. And now for Julia from Oslo. Have there been any problems on the maintenance point of view on the EV charging network on the public areas where charging network is located, especially during winter?
I don't have the details, but in general, I would say that there hasn't been any major problems related to the winter. No.
Okay. Thank you, Julia. Don't go away, because next question is to you again from Samuel. He asks, how does Oslo intend to reduce passenger car use by 1/3?
Oh, that's a very good question. I'm afraid I don't have the details on that actually, so I don't dare to answer that.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. You are still on the firing line, Julia, because next question is: do companies really need charging points for their vans or trucks along city streets, meaning that overnight charging at depots would not be sufficient? In Espoo, buses drive less than approximately 300 kilometers per day, but that they are charged overnight at depots.
I think it's a combination. Maybe it's not, the other one doesn't exclude the other one. I think you need the depots, but for example, for a taxi driver, a carpenter, someone who is driving goods, it could be also useful to have a charge pointer within the city. But I think there is a combination.
Cool. Thank you, Julia. Question to Chris. You presented 6 options how to locate EV charging stations. That reminds me of the existing petrol station networks and probably utilizing them in suitable places. But can you describe how will the density or demand of EV charging network look like when it's so-called ready? Do you need less EV charger stations than petrol stations?
Very good question, Mr. Yes, we will need far more electric vehicle charging stations, and I see that as a benefit. So what I wouldn't recommend is that we have many high power, expensive charging points, but many cheaper, slower charging points where people need them, where they spend a lot of their time. So overnight, if it's a residential property, for example, or in the daytime, if it's a workplace or a workplace car park, we can put cost-effective, but many of those charge points where it's convenient for people to put them, and that's the big change that electrification will bring. There won't be specific locations that you will get your fuel from. It will be where you need it, where it's convenient for you. So more in number, but lower cost is the ideal that we're working towards.
Cool, thank you. And now, Veli-Pekka, I have a question to you. What practical steps has Espoo done in developing charging infrastructure for electric vehicles in Espoo city?
Thank you, Risto. The city of Espoo wants to support citizens, and our main goal is to increase awareness of charging infrastructure and how to get it, for example, to the housing associations. We are currently producing a media campaign, which includes material both in websites and different kinds of videos.
Cool, thank you, Veli-Pekka. And Julia, one last question, I presume. There in Oslo is already a multiple charging points for public and private available. Have you personally observed how the utilization of public charging stations works? Are the people queuing for the chargers, or is there always a charger available?
When we did the mapping, then we looked at the utilization rate, for example. And we saw that the utilization rate is highest from when people come back from the working hour from work and until the morning, 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. But personally, on a personal level, we have had an EV, fully electrical car, for 7 years in Oslo, and we've been living in the center part of Oslo. We haven't had access to a parking lot, so we have been relied on public chargers in order to charge our car. And in these 7 years, it's maybe 3 or 4 times that we have had to sort of go to a private charger to charge our car a little bit. So Oslo has been really good in keeping up in deploying chargers at the same rate as the EVs have increased in the city. So the answer is, in general, no.
Okay, that sounds good, because now you have like 90,000 EVs there, and in less than 10 years there will be 200,000. So hopefully everything goes well and smoothly in the future too. Thank you. I presume that was all the questions we have had. I would like to thank everyone for the interesting presentations and the discussion. And okay, now I'll change to Finnish. Kiitän myös yleisöä hyvistä kysymyksistä ja kommenteista. Saatte myöhemmin webinaarin tallenteen ja jatkamme mielemmän keskustelua kasvokkain. Ja nyt annan teille myös 10 minuuttia elämästänne takaisin, ei nytkään 3-4 saakka. Kiitoksia kaikille. Mukavaa päivän ja syksyn jatkoa. Hei hei.